Hey everyone, it's Anthony from Pretty Printer here. In this video, I'll be showing you an example of an API, a RESTful API that has some authentication and uses Flask-SQLAlchemy. So since this video is so long, I'll show you first what the API does, and then I'll get into actually building it. So the API has two parts to it. It's a to-do API. So it has a list of users and it has a list of to-dos for individual users. So if I go to /user here and send, I get a message saying that the token is missing, and that's because it requires some authentication. So I have to go to the login route and specify some authentication. So my particular user is admin. I'll update the request and send it. I'll get a token in return. So I'll take that token and then I'll send a request to the user route again, but this time I will include a token. So the key is X access token, and the value will be the token that I just copied. Then I can send to user, and then I get a list of all the users in the database. With this, I can create new users. So by posting to user, I'm able to create a new user if I use a JSON object. So I'll switch to raw here and JSON. And a name will be pretty printed, and password will be, and I need quotes around this, password. So I'll send that. It tells me that a new user has been created. I'll go back to the user route and I'll see pretty printed is there. And in addition to viewing the users, I can view an individual user. I can also view to-dos. So let me go over to to-do and send. And I get nothing because my particular user, the admin user, doesn't have any to-dos. But if I create one by doing a post on to-do and change this to be text, and I'll say record a YouTube video, and I need to spell video correctly. I'll send that. It tells me the to-do has been created. I'll get the list of to-dos, and I see record a YouTube video is there, and I see complete is false. So if I put on number 4, it tells me the to-do has been completed. I'll get the list of to-dos again, and I see complete is true. So there are other things that are used in this API, other routes and methods, and I'll show you that as I build it. But this is a basic overview of the API. So it's basically a to-do API where multiple users can have their own to-do list, and an admin user can administer those users and create and delete users. So before I get into writing the code, I just want to mention that prettyprinted.com now has Flask courses, and I'll be adding general Python courses as well. I'm actually working on a course for Python requests. So if you're interested in signing up for any of the courses, go to prettyprinted.com. I have both free courses and I have a premium course up, and I'll be adding more courses over time. So now that we have the demo out of the way, let's get to writing the code. All right, so let's get started with the app. So I'll start with the standard Flask import, and I'll set everything up quickly here. And this is going to be more code than I usually write in my videos, so I don't know how long this video is going to be, but probably about 200 lines of code, I'm guessing, for this entire thing to work. So I'll need a secret key to use the encoding of the token. So secret key, this is secret. And then I'll also need to configure a database. So SQLite or SQLAlchemy database URI, it's going to be here on my machine. So SQLite, and then mount C users Anthony documents. Let's see, API example, and then I'll call it todo.db. So next I want to import Flask-SQLAlchemy. And then once I instantiate this, I can start creating the class. So pass app to SQLAlchemy. So pretty easy stuff so far. So now what I want to do is I want to create the two tables, or the two classes that represent the tables in the database. I'll have a user table and I'll have a to-do table. So obviously the user table will hold the user information, and the to-do table will hold the to-do information. So the first table is going to be the user table. So I need to inherit db.model, and I'll have a few columns in here. The first will be an ID column, standard ID column, an integer, and this will be the primary key. And then the next column will be a public ID column. And I'm using a public ID because when I put the public ID in the token, you'll be able to see it if you decode the token. And I don't want the IDs to match up exactly with the sequential IDs in the database, because then someone would know how many users are in the database and they can just simply supply the next number or the previous number. So to make it a little harder to figure out the users, I'll use the public ID. So this will be a string of 50 characters, and I'll be generating it from a UID, and I'll show you how to do that later on. Each user will have a name, so DB column, and then DB string again, a password for each user, DB string, let's say 80, and finally an admin column, which will be either true or false, meaning if it's true, they are an admin, and if it's false, they are not an admin. So the next table will be the to-do table, and it will inherit from db.model again. And this will also have an ID column. In this case, it's not really important to have a public ID, so I won't have one. So primary key is true. And then a text column, DB string, let's say 50, and that will represent the actual text of the to-do. A complete column, which will be a Boolean, meaning if it's true, the to-do has been completed. If it's not true, then the to-do has not been completed. And finally, a user ID, and this user ID will be the same user ID from the user table. I'm not going to add a foreign key just to keep everything simple, but you could if you want to. So that's it for the tables in the database. So what I want to do now is open up Python, and from, I believe the file name is API, I'm going to import DB, and now I'll create the database. So I'll exit out of Python and I'll open up SQLite 3 to do, and let's see if I have the tables there. I have to do and user, which is exactly what I want. And since there's no data, I can't even query. So I'll close that out and I'll start my app now just to get started on everything. So the first thing I want to do now that I have the database up and running is I want to handle the routes for the users. So the user routes will only be accessible by admin users, and they're basically used to see all the users that are existing in the database, to create a new user, and to delete users if you want to. So first I'll create the routes without having any information in them, and they're all going to be on the /user endpoint. And I'll add methods get just to make it clear here. So I'll call this function gets all users, and I'll return nothing for now since I'm just doing the outline of this. So I'll have a user and then a particular user ID. So I'll call it user ID here, and methods will be get again. And this will be called get one user. It's going to return nothing. And then I'll work on the final route. So user, this will be post. So methods, post. This one will be for creating a user. So create user, return. And then I'll have one for put. So this will take in a user ID. Methods will be put. And the name of the function will be promote user. So this will promote any user ID that's passed into an admin user. So I'll return nothing again. And then finally, the last one for the user endpoint will be delete. So takes in a user ID, and the method will be delete. And I'll call this delete user and return that. So pretty easy so far. And as we'll see, pretty much everything in this example will be straightforward, but there's just a lot of things that we have to handle individually. So the first route I'll work on is the get all users route. And this route will be pretty simple. Actually, you know what? I think working on the create user route will be a little better to start with. So I can create a user and then I can work on the get all users route to see the user that I created. So what I need to do is I need to import a couple of things. I'm going to import request to get the request data. And then I'm going to import, let's see, Jsonify so I can return the information. And then I also want to add a couple of imports to handle the things that I talked about earlier, like the UID. So I'll import UID to generate like a random public ID. And then I'll also import from workzerg security the password hashing functions. So workzerg.security import generate password hash and check hash word pass, because once I put the passwords in the database, I want them to be hashed. So check password hash. Okay, so now I'll go back to the create user route. And in here, what I'm going to do is whenever data is passed in, I'll use that data to create a user. So first thing I need to do is get the import JSON data. So I'll call this just data, and it will be request.getJSON. So that's pretty self-explanatory. It passes in the JSON data to that variable called data. And then I want to hash a password. So let's say hashed password. And the information that's going to be passed in through the JSON object will be the name of the user and the password for the user. So to generate the hash password, I'll use the generate password hash function, and I'll pass in data password because that's coming from the JSON object. And I'll specify the method, let's say SHA-256. And now that I have that information, I can create the new user in the database. So new user, and the public ID will be the string version of the UID. So UID.UID4 is the one I'm going to use. You can use a different one, but that's the one I'm using. So UID4 will be the public ID. And then the name is going to be data name. The password is going to be hash password. And finally, admin is going to be set to false. So actually, for this first user, I'll set admin to true. No, I just thought about it again. I'll set it to false, and then I'll use the put route to update to an admin. So once I have the new user, I can then db session add new user, and then db session commit. And then what I want to do is when this gets created, I want to say message new user created. So I'll save that, and I should be able to test this out to see if it works. So I will enter a route here. So port 5000 user, and then I'll go to create, so post, and in the body I will go to raw in Postman and then JSON, and I'll pass in a name and a password. So the name for this user will be admin, and the password is going to be, I should put the quotes around that, password will be, let's say 12345. And let's put that in a string. So 12345. So I send this, and it tells me new user has been created. Okay, so now the next part that I want to work on is the get all users route. And in the get all users route, I want to return a list of all the users that are in the database. So to do this, the very first thing I need to do is query the users table. So I'll create a variable called users, and I'll do user query all. So standard SQLAlchemy stuff. I'll create a new list to be output since I can't output the SQLAlchemy query results into a JSON object directly. I have to build my own object first. So I'll create the object list or the output list, and I'll loop over the users in the users results. So for each one, I'll create a new dictionary called user data. And then I'll just take the values that are in the results, so public ID, name, password, and admin, and I'll put them in this new dictionary that I'm creating. So user data, let's see, public ID is going to be equal to user.publicID. So on the right-hand side, that's the result from the database. On the left-hand side is the new dictionary I'm creating. And I'll do the same thing for the rest of the data. So the name will be name. Password will be user.password, and it's going to be hashed, as we'll see in a moment. User data, admin will be equal to user.admin. And then I need to append this dictionary to the output list. So output append user data. And then finally, I can return all this after the loop has completed. So return JSONify, let's say users, and then users will be the output list. So now if I go back to Postman and I'll go to Git and I send this with no extra information, I see a list of users. I only have one user in the database, so I have one result here. I see the password is hashed, and I see the public ID is a random value. So now what I want to do is I want to work on the get one user route. And for the get one user route, what I'll do is I'll do something very similar. This one will take in the user ID though, which is the public ID. You know what, I'll change this to public ID just to be a little more clear. So public ID there, and I'll do the same thing for these down here. So they're going to have a public ID as the parameter. So now what I need to do is simply query the database for this one particular user. So I'll say user.query filter by public ID equals the public ID that was passed in. And let's say if there's no user, I'll return a JSON object saying no user found. And if there is a user, then it will skip over that return statement, and I can build a dictionary in the same way I did above in the loop with the user data. So user data, it's going to be exactly the same. So I'll just copy all this here. Make sure it's indented properly. And then I can return that in a dictionary or as a JSON object. So user, and then I'll pass user data. Okay, so if I go back to Postman and I take this public ID and I get, first let's try get one. I get no user found because there's no public ID in my database with that number. But if I add the public ID I just got from the list, then I get the information that I am interested in. So pretty simple stuff so far. So now what I want to do is I want to work on the promote user route. And then the promote user route is going to be very similar to the get one. So I'll just copy this information here because I have to query for the user first and then determine if there is a user there. So I'll add that there in the put route. And then once I have that, I know that the user exists. So user admin will be true because I'm promoting the user to admin. And then db session to commit to save it. And I'll return a message saying that the user has been promoted. So message, the user has been promoted. Okay, so now let's try that out. If I go to put here and use the same public ID as before, I see the user has been promoted. Now, if I go back to Git and I send this, I see admin is now true and it's no longer false. So if I go to create, so posts, remove the ID, go to my body and create a new user. I'll call this user Anthony and send, and then get a list of all the users. I see Anthony is false for admin, but the user admin is true for admin. And then they both have different public IDs. And I'll create one more user just to demonstrate delete in a second. So let's say delete me will be the username. So send and then get everything. And I see delete me is there. So delete is similar to getting one user and promoting a user. So I need to copy and paste that. So I have the user. If there's no user found, it returns a message. And what I need to do simply is db session.delete the user and then commit it. So db session.commit. And I'll return a message saying that the user has been deleted. So message, the user has been deleted. Okay, so simple enough. Save that. And I'll go to my delete route. But first, I'll copy the public ID for delete me. And I'll go to delete and add / the public ID. I'll send. It tells me the user has been deleted. If I try sending this again, it tells me no user found because I just deleted it from the database. So that's all the functionality that I need inside of the user routes. There's going to be a little more that I'll add for the authentication, but for now, this works pretty well. So let's get started working on the actual authentication. So now what I want to do is I want to create a route called login. And this route will allow me to take the username and password for a user, enter it using HTTP basic authentication, and then in return, I'll get a token. And this token will expire after some time. And with that token, I'll put it in a header for all the subsequent requests so I can be constantly authenticated without having to log in using a username and password every single time. So of course, that will make more sense once I actually demo it. So let me create this quickly. So I'll create the function called login. And the first thing I want to do is I want to get the authorization information. So request.authorization. And now what I want to do is I want to make sure that this authorization information is actually complete. So what I'll do is I'll say if not auth or not auth.username or not auth.password, I want to return the make response for logging in. So this is basically saying if there's no authentication information at all, if there's no username or there's no password, return the following. So I need to import make request or make response. And then down here, what I'll do is I'll require that the user login. So I'll say could not verify. I'll pass back a 401 and I'll pass back the appropriate header. So it's www-authenticate. And then the value for this header will be basic realm, if I can spell that correctly. And then login required will be the message that I put. So that should be it. And now, if there's actually authentication information, the next thing that I want to do is I want to get the user. So user.query filter by, and then I'm going to take the name from the authorization, so auth.username, and I'll get the first result, meaning the only user because the name should be unique. And of course, if not user, I'll return a JSON object saying, let's see, JSONify, no user found. And actually, you know what? I'll just copy and paste this because I need better login information. Okay, so that's fine. So now what I want to do is, if I get past this if not user check, that means that the user exists in the database. So what I need to do is check the password. So if check password hash, I'll pass in the password that was in the database first, so user.password, and then auth.password is the password that was actually passed in with the request. And if all this works, then I can generate a token. So to generate the token, first I need to import JWT or JWT. So import JWT using PyJWT, and I'll create the token. So I'll create a token. I'll call the resulting value token. So JWT encode. And what I want to encode is both the public ID. So like I said, I'm not going to put the regular ID in here because I don't want people to be able to guess my other IDs. So instead I'll put the public ID, which will be user.public ID, and that's from the database. And then I'll also put an expiration in here. So for the expiration, I need to import datetime. And then I'll use datetime to set the expiration date. So for expiration, the expiration, of course, has to be a typical Unix UTC timestamp. So to do that, I'll call datetime.datetime.utc now, and I'm going to add a time delta of, let's say, 30 minutes, and that's how long my time delta. So 30 minutes will be how long the token is active. It can be anything you want, but I'll just set it to 30 minutes. So app.config secret key will be used to encode the token. And then once I have the token, I can simply return it in a JSON object. So return JSONify token.decode UTF-8. And if the password doesn't check out, then I'll simply return the login required thing again. So there are 3 cases when the login gets passed back: when they don't supply any authorization information, when there's no user in the database for the user they pass in, or the password is incorrect. So now let's try this login route. So I'll go back to Postman and I'll go to Git, and I'll copy or I'll move that and go to login. And now for authorization, I need to go to basic auth, and username will be admin, and the password is going to be 12345. So update requests, and I'll send. And it failed, so I probably have a syntax error somewhere. I probably saved a little too early. So I'll send this again, and I see I have this token. So with this token, I will authenticate subsequent requests to all the other routes. So only the login route works with HTTP basic authentication, and all the other routes will work with the token. So now what I want to do is I want to create the decorator to work with the token. And in this case, I'll be using the header to actually get the token. So I'll create the decorator up here, and I'll put it below the models. So I'll create a function. I'll call it token required. Takes in the function that gets decorated. And I need to import wraps from functools. So from functools, import wraps. So wraps. And then I'll create the inner decorated function. Passes in the positional arguments and then the keyword arguments. So first, I'll create an empty token. And then what I want to do is I want to check and see if there's a header called X access token. So in this header, that's where I'm going to pass the token if I have one. So request.headers is where all the headers are stored. So if it is in headers, what I want to say is request headers, X access token gets passed to this token variable that I created. And if not token, meaning there is no token, I'll return a message saying token is missing. So message token is missing. And I'll pass back 401 as well. If the token is there, then it will move on. And what I want to do is I'll add a try except block, because this time I'm using JSON Web Tokens to decode the token. And if the token is invalid, it will raise an exception. So I need the try except blocked. So I'll have data here, which will be the token data. And I'll say JSON Web Token .decode. I'll take the token that was passed in, and I'll pass in the secret key as well from the app. And if everything works with that, what I want to do is I want to query the database for the user that public ID in the token belongs to. So I'll call this current user, user.query, filter by, and then the public ID is going to be data, and then the public ID. So data is the data in the token, and there should be a public ID in there. Since it's unique, I can get the first result. If that doesn't work, then I'll use the except block, and I'll say token is invalid. And I'll pass back 401 again. So if I make it past the except block, that means that the token is valid. I have a user. So now that I have the user, I want to actually pass that user object to the route. So to do that, I'll return F, and I'll pass current user first, and then I'll pass the other arguments. So the positional arguments and the keyword arguments. And finally, I can return the decorated function inside of my token required decorator. So now what I can do is I can add the decorator to all the routes. So token required. And once I add this decorator, I have to add current user because I'm passing it to the function that gets decorated here. So the function that gets decorated is get all users. So that's what F represents. And if I pass current user there, then I have to accept it as a parameter there. So I'll do the same thing for all the other routes that I have. So current user comes first, and then public ID will be one of the positional arguments. And this will be exactly the same for all the other routes. So current user, let's see, token required. Current user comes before public ID. And let's see, where is it? Token required, current user before public ID once again. And of course I have the login route, but that login route is for logging in directly, so I don't have to use the token required decorator with it. So now that I have the token required decorator, what I want to do is I want to verify that the user is actually an admin user. If they are, then they can continue doing things in the route. And if they're not, then it will give them a message saying like, hey, you can't do that. So I'll do that for each route, and I'll demonstrate it on the get all users, and then I'll just copy and paste for the rest. So now that I have the current user, remember that's a SQLAlchemy database object. So if not current user.admin, meaning admin is false, I want to say, let's see, message cannot perform that function. So I'll save that, and let's see what happens when I take this header, or take this and put it in a header. So I'll go to get and user, the headers. I'll add X access token, copy and paste that, and I'll send. And it gives me the information that I'm looking for. But now if I go back to login, so let's say I'll go back to login, and instead of admin, I'll log in as Anthony, which is a regular user. I'll get the token for Anthony, and I'll take that token and I'll put it here, and now I'll send. And the token isn't valid, so I think I copy and pasted wrong. I did, because I didn't copy the E at the beginning. So let's try that again. Okay, so send, and it tells me cannot perform that function, and I cannot perform that function because Anthony is not an admin user. Admin is the admin user. So because that's so simple, it should work for the other routes. So I'll just copy and paste this to the other places. So that should be the first thing in each one of the routes. So create user as well, and then promote user, and finally delete user. So this ensures that only admin users can do all these things. So that's it for the user routes. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to create the routes to handle the actual to-do items to get the functionality that we're interested in our API. So the first thing I'll do is I'll create the outline of the routes. So there will be 5 routes again. So methods, get, and I'll call this get all to-dos. And it's going to return nothing at the beginning. I'll fill that in a moment. So to-do, and then let's see, a to-do ID. Methods will be get, again, get one to-do, and I'll pass in the to-do ID here. Just return nothing. And then I'll have a route for creating to-dos. So methods post create to-do. Doesn't have any parameters. I'll return nothing. App route to-do. Let's see, methods put. This will be for completing a to-do item. So I need the to-do ID again. Let's see, what should it be? Complete to-do is what I'll call it, and it takes in a to-do ID. And then finally, what I'll do is I'll add the delete one. So to-do takes in a to-do ID. Methods will be delete. And let's call this delete to-do. So as we'll see, the code in these routes will be pretty similar to the code in the users routes because there's a symmetry in the API between users and to-dos. Even though there's different data, it behaves in a very similar way. So I'll return that. And now I'll add the token required decorator to everything. So token required. And I'll need the current user. So current user goes before to-do ID, not after. If you put it after, it won't work. So token required, current user, token required, current user, and finally the delete one. Okay, so now, first thing I want to work on is the create to-do route, and it's going to be pretty similar to how users were created, but instead of a user, this is going to be a to-do item. So what I'll do is the first thing I need to do is get the requests JSON. So get JSON. And in this case, I don't have to check if there's an admin user or not because this is for everyone. It's not for just admin users. This is for like the regular users of your API. So I'll get the JSON data and I'll put it in a variable called data. And I'll create a new object for the database called new to do. And I'll instantiate it using text, data text, which will be one of the items in the JSON object. Was actually going to be the only item in the JSON object. Complete will start off as false, and the user ID that this to-do belongs to will be the current user, which is from the token .id. And then I can add this to the session. So db session add new to-do, and then db session.commit. And finally, I'll return a message saying something like message todo created. Okay, so now let's test this out. I still have the token in my header. So let's say todo. And for the body, I need to change that to posts. And the text will be, let's say, go to the store. So that'd be the first todo item that I add. I'll send, and it says todo created. And let's add another one. Take out the trash. Todo created. And I'll add one more. Let's say, check the mail. Okay, so now that I have some to-dos in the database, I need to be able to see them. So I'll work on the routes where I get all to-dos first, and then of course I'll work on the route where I can get individual to-dos. So the first thing I need to do is I need to query the database for all the to-do items that belong to the current logged in user. So I'll create a variable called to-dos, and I'll do to-do.query.filter by, and the user ID for the to-dos that I'm looking for will be the current user.id. And this will be multiple, so I'll use all instead of first. And like the route to get all the users, I'll create my own output data, and I'll loop over the to-dos. So for to-do and to-dos, see, to-do data, I'll call this, it's going to be a dictionary, and then it's going to have an ID, which will be todo.id. Then it will have a text, so todo.text. And then finally, it will have complete, and that will be todo.complete. I'll append this to the output, append todo data, and I'll return all these in a JSON object. So to-dos and output. So let's go to the to-do route, and the authorization is not required here. So I'll get everything. And now I see the 3 to-do items that I have. Go to the store, take out the trash, and check the mail. And I also have 3 IDs, 1, 2, and 3. And as you can see, they are all false, meaning they haven't been completed yet. So now I'll work on the next route, which is the get one to-do. And this, once again, is pretty straightforward. So I'll do to-do query, filter by. I'm looking for a to-do ID and a user ID. So this way you can't see someone else's to-do ID even if you have their ID. So to-do ID is passed in, and current user has the user ID, and this should only be 1, so first. If there's no to-do item found for that particular ID, I'll return a message saying message no to-do found. If it is found, then it will skip that, and I'll just do the same thing up here. So since the data is the same name, I'll just copy and paste and indent this properly. And I'll return a JSON object with the to-do data. So to-do data. So let's try that out. If I do to-do/2 and send, it tells me current user is not defined. So I used the wrong name. I put current ID instead of current user. So I'll save that and I'll send it again. And it tells me take out the trash for number 2. If I go to number 3, it tells me check the mail. And of course I have number 1. Go to the store. And remember, I still have the token in the header. If I didn't have that token, then I get an error. So now let's work on put, which means complete a to-do item. So these 3 lines will be the same because I need to find the to-do in the database and verify that it belongs to the user. And if there's no to-do in the database, then it will return nothing. And just to demonstrate, if I put 4 and send, I get no to-do found for get. So with put, all I have to do once I know that the to-do exists in the database, I'll go to the complete column and I'll set it to true. And then db session commit. And then I'll say in a message, to-do item has been completed. So let's try that out. I'll go to put, I'll use 4, tells me no to-do found. But if I use number 3 and send, it tells me to-do item has been completed. So if I go to get for 3, I see complete is now true. And if I get all of them, I see 1 and 2 are false, but 3 is true because I just updated 3 to be complete. So the last route I need to work on is the delete route. So this code is going to be the same because I'm looking for a to-do in the database. I need to verify it belongs to the user. And if everything is good, then it allows me to move on. And then I'll just add db session.delete and I'll pass in the to-do item. db session commit will save that change in the database. And I'll return a JSON object with a message saying to-do item deleted. So I'll save that and I'll go to the delete here and I'll pass in to send. It tells me to-do item deleted. If I send that again, it says no to-do found because I just deleted it from the database. So if I go to get to no to-do found, and if I go to the route with no number, then I see that I only have 1 and 3 in the database so far. So I believe that is it. It's a little over 200 lines of code, but as you can see, everything is pretty straightforward once you know how all the pieces work individually. Combining them isn't that difficult. So even though it took me like 45 minutes to combine everything, nothing in here should have been difficult if you understand the foundation material. So how to authenticate an API, how to create decorators, how to use SQLAlchemy. All that stuff comes together to build this nice RESTful API to generate to-dos. And of course, if I wanted to add to-dos for a different user, then I'd change the token. I log in with that user first, I get a token back, and then I'd use that token on the to-do routes. And those to-do items will be created for that particular user because it's using a different user ID. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions about this video, you can leave a comment down below and I will answer it. If you want to get this code for the video, I will put a link in the description below and you can go to that link and download the code for this video. Like I said early in the video, check out prettyprinted.com for courses. After I work on this particular course, I'm actually going to start outlining the next request course in Python. So just watch out for that. If you sign up for a free course on prettyprinted.com, I'll let you know when I release any other courses. And of course, if you sign up for a premium course, I'll let you know if I release any other courses as well. So that's it for this video. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. And thank you for watching this video. I know it's my longest video so far, so thanks for being patient. And I will talk to you next time.